Captured effortlessly, that's the way it was. Happened so naturally, I did not know it was love. The next thing I felt was you holding me close. What was I gonna do? I let myself go, and now we're flying through the stars. I hope this night will last forever. Oh, 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 oh. Ain't nobody loves me better.
Hi, I'm John Cullen. Welcome to a new episode of In Plain Sight. It's occurred to me that most of the reporting that I've been doing over the course of the past 2 years has been using data that's available to everybody. It's in plain sight. I don't have any special credentials or special skills necessarily that have allowed me to access any of this information. So I thought I'd start a series showing people how to get to the information that has driven some of the observations that I've made about the pandemic. So we can start with the maps, and then I can show you a little bit around at the CDC and where I get some of the data that I get at the CDC. We can talk about that a little bit. And then I can show you some data that I get from the WHO and how and where I get that data. And then we can make some observations together in real time. I'm recording this on Wednesday, April the 27th, 2022. And let's begin with the map and where do we go to get this. So this data has been in plain sight since the very beginning. What you're looking at here is the ESRI ArcInfo implementation from Johns Hopkins. Now, how do we find this? Where do you get this if you want to show this to your friends and show them some of these statistics? Let me show you how to do it. First thing we're going to do, just to make sure that everybody's using the same version of the map, is we go to Drudge Report. And for the past 2 years, Drudge Report has been showing a link to the same map. I scroll down to the middle column. Now I'm on a computer. You guys, if you're using a phone, it's a little bit different. So I'm using a computer right now. So on a computer, Drudge Report shows up as 3 columns of stuff. And in the middle column on a computer, if Drudge would stop refreshing, the last thing before it gives you a list of all of these authors is something that says World Sick Map. Just above it, it tells you how many people died in the last 7 days on average, how many cases there are in the USA. But the final link before the list of all of these authors is the World Sick Map link. And if you click on the World Sick Map link, it's going to take you to the Johns Hopkins map. And this is the mapping system that was built by Ensheng Dong while working at Johns Hopkins University. All right, so this is reloading fresh data, and let's take a look. What do we see here? What do we notice right out of the gate? Just looking at this main page on the map. So now you know how to find it. But what jumps out at me? So what is this telling me? And that's really the key. Well, the first thing that I notice when I look at this is the big numbers up on top. You see up on top it says total deaths 6.2 million, 6.227 million people have died with COVID. 91,000 in the last 28 days. So of the 6.2 million people that have died, 91,000 have died in the last 28 days. Well, to me, that doesn't sound like that much compared to 6.2 million. And so that draws my attention over to the white area on the right where we have this white chart. What the white chart is confirming is if we go all the way out to the right side here, that's the most recent report. So that's April 24th of 2022. And as of April 24th, 2022, according to Johns Hopkins School of Public Health, the Michael Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins, there are 19.696 thousand people that died that week of COVID. Now, why is that notable? It's notable because we haven't had that few people die since March of 2020. Do you see how where my cursor is right now, all the way out here on the right side? So my cursor's out here. And that is less than any other week here until we get all the way back to March of 2020. So that's a pretty remarkable fact, right? So this isn't a supposition. It's not a theory. This is a fact based on data that there haven't been this few people that have died with or of COVID since March of 2020. Right? Since then, it's all been more. So this is a good sign. So that's one observation that we can make here. The other thing is that as far as the number of new cases, South Korea continues to lead the world. South Korea has 4.3 million cases in the last 4 weeks out of a total of 17 million cases. And 6,600 people have died. That's more than 25% of the total deaths in Korea have occurred in the last 4 weeks. So that's just a quick observation that we can make looking at Korea. Now, where it gets awkward is when we compare Korea, which has a population. Let's look at the population of Korea. Let's see if we can find that. So I'm going to, some people call it worldometers or worldometers, I'm not sure, but here it shows South Korea with a population of 51 million people. Well, 51 million people, that's more than California. That's more than Texas. That's more than Florida. That's more than New York. And yet, when we look at how many people have died in Korea, the number's 22,000. 22,466 people have died, but their population is bigger than California. And when we look at the coronavirus statistics in the United States, now where am I getting this? So again, in plain sight. Okay, this data that I'm using is from worldometers.info /coronavirus, or you just click on this little coronavirus link they have up here. Let me see if you guys can see that coronavirus link. With this data, we can look at, for example, countries sorted by population rather than total deaths. When we sort the COVID data at worldometers.info by total deaths, the United States is number one, with, according to them, over 1 million deaths. Brazil is number two, with 663,000. Then India, with 522,000. If we click on India, we see they have 522,000 people that have died, 376. And we scroll down and we see how many new cases there are in India right now. And we can take a closer look at that. So India doesn't seem to have a whole lot of cases since March. Looks like they've kind of eradicated it, right? Since March 8th, and it's now April 28th, 27th, 28th. So in the last 6 weeks, it looks like nothing has happened in India. That's great news. What about deaths? So it looks like a couple people have died, but there aren't any new cases. So even deaths have tapered off rather dramatically in India. So that's what we see here. Now this is worldometers.info where I'm getting this. So when we go to countries and we look at the United States, and we look at the states in the United States by total deaths, we have California, Texas, Florida, New York, Pennsylvania. And on the right-hand side, it tells you the population. So California is 39 million people. And Texas is about 29 million people. That's Texas. And then Florida, 21.5 million people. And then New York, about 20 million people. But none of these compare to Korea. Korea's got 51 million people. So with more people, Korea has far fewer dead. In other words, we look at New York. New York has almost 69,000 people that have died of COVID. Whereas when we were looking at Korea, they've got 22,000 people. Now, many people have said, well, that's because they're not obese. The people in Korea eat kimchi and they're not as obese as Americans are, and that explains it. But that doesn't explain it. The reason it doesn't explain it is because if you go to the CDC's data, that's where we're going to go next. We're going to go to the demographics for COVID-19 deaths. And again, the data is in plain sight. So people talking about comorbidities and Americans are fat, and because they're fat, they die of COVID. When we go to the comorbidities data from the CDC, that's where we are now. We're at a CDC Gov website here, the National Center for Health Statistics. And they have a whole series of sections here, the COVID-19 death data and resources. And in that section of death data and resources, we're looking at the weekly updates by select demographic and geographic characteristics. And one of those is comorbidities. So when we go to comorbidities, it shows us specifically, it says, for over 5% of these deaths, COVID-19 was the only cause mentioned on the death certificate, period. For deaths with conditions or causes in addition to COVID-19, on average, there were 4 additional conditions or causes per death. For data on deaths involving COVID by time period, jurisdiction, and other health conditions, press here to download. So this is the data. And this is in plain sight. So when we click here to download, it takes us to a new page at the CDC. And as you see here, it says this data was updated April 27th, 2022. And I'm going to hit export. And we'll take a look at what we get here. So this is where I get the data that I'm using to look at all these different aspects of the pandemic. But one of the key elements here, if we just go back a page, is right here in plain sight on the CDC's page, where it talks about the comorbidities. It tells you what the various comorbidities were and how many people died with those comorbidities in addition to COVID. And when we look here, we see influenza and pneumonia. And when we sort by all ages, COVID-19 deaths, 991,795 is what this says. But influenza and pneumonia, 483,583 of those people had influenza and pneumonia in addition to COVID-19. Then they break it out by age group. So they tell you of the 483,000, 1,300 were young, up to 24, birth to 24. 5,400 of them were 25 to 34. And you see the different numbers for each one of these age groups. So the CDC tells us right here, in plain sight, that of the 991,795 people that died with COVID, 483,000 of them, 483,583 of them, also had influenza and pneumonia, which we call P&I. Now, I've been talking about P&I for some time. I talk about influenza and P&I deaths. So where do I get that data? Where's that coming from? This is the data for COVID, and this is telling us the comorbidities, and it's showing us that the number one comorbidity is influenza. Nothing even comes close. 483,000 of the 991. So just about half, just shy of half. Okay? So where do we get the influenza and pneumonia deaths from? Well, it's another CDC site. And this is the influenza mortality system. And this system used to be used to track influenza and pneumonia exclusively. And then they added COVID to it. So once upon a time, we could look at just pneumonia and influenza. And using that data, we could see that just pneumonia and influenza, we've been in excess of our baselines throughout the entire season. Up here, I can click the radio button to include COVID, and then we get COVID data also. So what I often will do is I'll go get the data just for pneumonia and influenza and leave out COVID to get a baseline and to see what that looks like. So let's do that first. Let's go get a baseline of pneumonia and influenza from 2017 to 2022 without COVID, and let's see what that looks like. So I'll hit downloads and tell it, yes, show me what you're showing me, and don't send me something different than that. And it's going to send me a new spreadsheet of data. And let me show you guys what this looks like. All right, with this spreadsheet now, this is showing us just P&I deaths for the last 5 years. So let me show you what this looks like without doing a whole lot of monkey business. What we really just need here is to change this from total deaths to total P&I deaths. And what's interesting is they used to add these two numbers up and call it P&I deaths. But then with COVID, they sort of changed the way we do things here. So I'm going to go back to the old way where we just add influenza deaths to pneumonia deaths, and that's P&I. And since there was no COVID and there is no COVID in this report, we don't really need COVID. See, the last couple weeks are not complete, so there's some data missing, but we don't really need this column, so let's just get rid of that. All right, now let's simply chart the total P&I deaths since week 40 of 2017, which ironically is October 1st, 2017. So let's do a quick chart of this data here. So I'm going to highlight that data. So these are the P&I deaths without COVID, meaning this has nothing to do with COVID. The COVID data was deselected. And this is how many people died per week. And the right-hand side is showing you that number. So the right-hand side right now is going up to about 18,000. And it's somewhat unprecedented. Let me just make a couple quick changes to clean this up. The bottom should have the week numbers, and it doesn't. So let me clean that up. And so what we're looking at here is 5 years of P&I deaths as recorded at the CDC. And the bottom is showing the week number. And the week number 40 is the beginning of the season. So we got too many labels here. We're going to... All right. So all the way on the left side is October 1st, 2017. And that's all the way over here on the left. This is where you'll see me typing in a second. October 2017 is all the way on the left. And a certain phenomenon occurred early in 2020. Early in 2020, 4,000 people a week were dying from influenza. And that began right here, week 1. So as of week 1 in 2020, 4,000 people a week were dying of influenza, and then it went up, 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 up. And this was before COVID arrived in America. We didn't have major COVID deaths in America in January of 2020. That didn't happen. And so that's what got my attention, was that there were over 4,000 people a week dying of influenza. And that wasn't making the news, and that just seemed strange. So when I charted all of these COVID deaths over the course of a number of years here, so this is a 5-year view that you're looking at now, this is rather spectacular, right? These are P&I deaths. This is pneumonia and influenza on a weekly basis in the USA. So this is where I go to get that data. All right, so keep that in mind. Now we're going to go back to the same place we went before, this website that we had. And we're going to tell it to give us the data with COVID. So the same data, but this time give it to us with the COVID data. So we want to see the COVID deaths. Same time period, 2017 to 2022. This is USA. This is the CDC's website. Okay, so let's download this data now and see what we get. All right, let's switch over to our spreadsheet. So now we're looking at COVID and influenza. And I'm going to freeze the top row again. Now, P&I deaths still need to be calculated. So P&I, total P&I, and then this will be, well, we have total COVID, so we don't really need that. So we can get rid of this column. And we can get rid of this column. So we have our total number of COVID deaths, and we need our P&I deaths, and we need that to be a formula. So we need that to be influenza plus pneumonia, and that's P&I. So I'm going to copy that formula all the way down the spreadsheet. And now we've got our COVID deaths, and we've got our P&I deaths. So we've got both numbers. So now we're going to chart all that. Let's go up here and do that. So I'm telling it what data I want to chart. Hit the chart button. Now it's going to make this one green, and I like to have that one blue. So I'll make that blue. I'll make this one green. What happened to my green? There we go. All right. So now it looks a lot like the influenza chart that we just looked at, but now we've added in COVID. So the influenza data should be identical. The blue data should be identical. And this is the weeks that was incorrect before. It's going to be incorrect again, so we're going to fix that. And we want it custom. We want it every 13 weeks, because every 13 weeks is a new fiscal quarter. Okay. And there we go. So this is the same data that we were just looking at before with the influenza deaths on a weekly basis, but then we added in the COVID deaths. And when we add in these weekly COVID deaths, let me change that legend. This is all deaths with COVID, and that's weekly. And then this other one is weekly P&I deaths. So now with this chart, you can compare what this chart looks like compared to the chart we were just looking at a moment ago. Right? So when we look at the chart we just had a moment ago, let's see, looked like that. Let's see, switch it for you guys. So that's what it looks like with just the influenza P&I. And then this is what it looks like with influenza P&I and COVID layered on top. So the thing about this that's somewhat remarkable is that they seem to align pretty closely, right? So you see how the peaks and the valleys kind of went hand in hand. I don't know, kind of interesting here. But what's most interesting to me about this data is that it's in plain sight. In other words, once again, you can get to this data simply by going to the CDC's website and pulling this up. So the spreadsheet data that we're doing, all right, let me show you another place I go to get some of the data that we report on, and that's the World Health Organization's maps. So this page I'm going to share with you is the World Health Organization COVID dashboard, and you can get to this website by going to covid19.who.int. And this is another mapping implementation. So this is showing how many people have died in different parts of the world. So this is another instance similar to what you see from the Johns Hopkins School of Health. I can click on a country like Nigeria, and according to the World Health Organization, Nigeria, with over 200 million people, has 3,143 people that have died of COVID. So that's a really great health response. 3,143 people. The reason that's so good is because if you look at the United States, certainly there's no state in the United States that has 200 million people. But to get to a state with 3,000 dead, we've got to go to Rhode Island. So Rhode Island has 3,538 dead, and according to the World Health Organization, Nigeria has fewer dead with 200 million people. So that's why this map is interesting. Now, we can go to other countries and click on them, like China. And this is breaking news right here. According to the World Health Organization, China has exceeded 15,000 deaths from COVID. This is being reported right now and breaking right now. So this data has been in plain sight, and yet you were told it's the China virus. So when we look at 15,000 people that have died in all of China, what states have about 15,000 dead in the United States? Well, Kentucky. So Kentucky has more people dead than China, according to the authoritative sources, right? Louisiana has more people dead than China, according to the authoritative sources. So this data that I'm showing you at Worldometers, at the WHO, the maps at the WHO, the maps at Johns Hopkins, all this data is in plain sight. Right? So the fact that Korea has 22,466 people that have died, compared to, let's go to the United States, California with 90,000 people. Korea's got way more people. Korea's got over 50 million. California doesn't even have 40 million. Yet California has 90,000 dead, and Korea's got 22,000. So with all this data in plain sight, the question is, how did everybody get hypnotized? I'm John Cullen. Thanks for joining.
Yes, the same kind of story seems to come down from long ago. Two friends having coffee together when something flies by their window. It might be out on that lawn, which is wide, at least half of a playing field. Because there's no explaining what your imagination can make you see and feel. Your body means nothing, you'll be hypnotized. Now it's not a meaningless question to ask if they've been and gone. I remember a talk about North Carolina in a strange, strange poem. You see, the sides were like glass in the thick of a forest without a road. And if any man's hand ever made that land, then I think it would have showed. And that's why it seems like a dream. They got me hypnotized. And I know that's right. Say there's a place down in Mexico where a man can fly over mountains and hills. He don't need an airplane or some kind of engine, and he never